The diner smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, a scent I'd grown so accustomed to that I barely noticed it anymore. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made even the youngest customers look tired. My feet ached in my worn sneakers, the same pair I'd been wearing for 8 months because new ones weren't in the budget. Not when rent was 2 weeks overdue and my daughter's daycare cost more than I made in tips on a good week. I moved between tables like a ghost, refilling coffee cups and forcing smiles that never quite reached my eyes. The other waitresses had long since stopped trying to make conversation with me. I was the quiet one, the one who kept her head down and never complained, even when Jerry the cook accidentally brushed against me in the kitchen or when customers snapped their fingers at me like I was a dog. "Table 7 needs more water," Diane barked from behind the counter, not bothering to look up from her phone. She was the kind of woman who'd been beautiful once and couldn't quite accept that those days were behind her. Now she just wore too much makeup and treated the younger waitresses like competition. I grabbed the pitcher and made my way to table 7, my mind already running through the calculations I did every night. If I could pick up an extra shift, maybe cover Sarah's preschool for next month. If Mrs. Chen upstairs could watch her on Tuesday nights, I could work the late shift that paid slightly better. If. My entire life had become a series of impossible ifs. The diner was nearly empty, as it usually was on Tuesday afternoons. Just old Mr. Harrison in his usual corner booth, nursing the same cup of coffee for 3 hours, and a young couple by the window who couldn't keep their hands off each other, and table 7. I'd noticed them when they came in, impossible not to. 3 men in suits that probably cost more than my annual income, sitting in a booth meant for 4. They didn't belong here, not in this greasy spoon on the wrong side of town where the tiles were cracked and the menus were sticky with old syrup. But it was the 4th man who made my hands tremble slightly as I approached. He sat with his back to the wall. I noticed that immediately, the way his dark eyes scanned the room constantly, cataloging exits and threats. He wore a black suit that fit him like it had been tailored to his exact measurements. And even sitting down, I could tell he was tall. His hair was dark, touched with silver at the temples, and there was something about the way he held himself that screamed danger and power in equal measure. The other 3 men fell silent as I approached, their conversation dying mid-sentence. One of them, a bull of a man with a neck wider than my thigh, actually straightened in his seat, his hand moving subtly toward his jacket. I tried not to think about what might be hidden there. "More water?" My voice came out smaller than I intended, and I hated myself for it. I'd learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more pain, more exploitation. But something about these men, about him, made my usual armor feel paper thin. The man in black, the one who was clearly in charge, looked up at me, and I felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. His eyes were the color of smoke, gray and impenetrable, and they studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, not the way Jerry looked at me, with crude hunger. This was different, calculating, dangerous. "Yes, thank you," he said, his voice low and accented in a way I couldn't quite place. Eastern European, maybe. Russian? His English was perfect, but there was something underneath it, something that spoke of cold winters and harder streets than the ones I knew. I poured the water with shaking hands, trying not to spill. The bull-necked man watched me like I might pull a weapon from my apron. The other 2, one thin and weasel-like, the other young and pretty in a dangerous sort of way, seemed to be waiting for some signal from their boss. "Will there be anything else?" I asked, already backing away, wanting nothing more than to return to the safety of the counter where Diane was still scrolling through her phone. Actually, the dark-haired man's phone buzzed, and he held up one finger, gesturing for me to wait. I froze, pitcher still in hand, as he answered in rapid Russian. The language flowed from him like water, harsh and beautiful all at once, and something in my chest tightened. I shouldn't have understood it. I shouldn't have been able to follow the conversation. But I did. "Mama, I told you I'm working," he said, and there was something almost tender in his voice, so at odds with the aura of menace that surrounded him. "No, I can't come for dinner tonight. Yes, I know you made borscht. Mama, please." The words transported me back 23 years, to a tiny apartment that always smelled like black bread and cabbage, where my mother sang while she cooked and my father read the newspaper in his threadbare armchair. Before the accident, before the foster homes, before I learned that the past was something to be buried deep where no one could use it against you. The man on the phone sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of exasperation that was so familiar, so human, that I almost smiled. Fine. I'll try to stop by later. But don't wait up for me. I might be occupied. He switched back to English, barking orders at the weasel-faced man about some shipment that needed to be delayed. And I stood there like an idiot, rooted to the spot, memories flooding through me with the force of a tidal wave. "Miss?" The bull-necked man's voice was sharp. "He asked you a question." I blinked, realizing that the dark-haired man was staring at me again. Those gray eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm sorry, what?" "I asked if the kitchen could prepare chicken soup," he repeated. And there was something new in his voice now. Curiosity? Suspicion? My mother keeps insisting I'm not eating properly. The words were out before I could stop them, tumbling from my lips in Russian before my brain could catch up to my mouth. All mothers think their sons don't eat properly. It's in the job description. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. The bull-necked man's hand moved inside his jacket. The weasel-faced man half stood from his seat. The pretty one's eyes went wide with something that might have been fear or excitement. I couldn't tell which, but it was the dark-haired man's reaction that terrified me most. He went utterly still, his entire body tensing like a predator about to strike. Those gray eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe, and I watched as shock gave way to something else. Something calculating and far more dangerous. "You speak Russian." It wasn't a question. His voice had gone soft, deadly soft, and I realized with growing horror that I'd made a terrible mistake. My throat closed up. The pitcher slipped from my nerveless fingers, and I watched as if in slow motion as it shattered against the tile floor, water and broken glass spreading across the worn linoleum. "I'm so sorry," I gasped, dropping to my knees immediately, my hands shaking as I tried to gather the pieces. This was it. Jerry would fire me. I couldn't afford to lose this job. I couldn't afford to lose anything. "Leave it." The command was quiet but absolute. I looked up to find the dark-haired man standing over me, having moved with a speed and silence that should have been impossible for someone his size. He extended a hand, and I stared at it like it might be a trap. Which it probably was. His hands were large, I noticed, with long fingers and scars across the knuckles. Hands that had built things. Broken things. The watch on his wrist probably cost more than everything I owned combined. "I said leave it," he repeated, his accent thicker now. And there was something in his voice that made obedience instinctive. I took his hand, warm, calloused, strong, and let him pull me to my feet. He didn't let go immediately, and I found myself standing far too close to him. Close enough to smell his cologne, something expensive and dark, with notes of leather and smoke. "Where did you learn to speak Russian?" he asked, still holding my hand, his thumb pressing against my pulse point in a way that was probably not accidental. He would feel how fast my heart was racing. He would know I was terrified. My parents... I couldn't think straight with him this close, with those eyes boring into mine like he could see every secret I'd ever kept. They were immigrants from Moscow. They died when I was young. It was the truth, or part of it. The sanitized version I gave to the rare person who asked. I didn't mention the car accident that killed them both when I was 7. Didn't mention the 15 foster homes, the high school I barely graduated from, the string of bad decisions that had led me here, to this moment, with my hand in the grip of a man who was clearly dangerous in ways I couldn't begin to understand. "Moscow," he repeated, and something flickered across his face. "What was your family name? Why?" The word came out sharper than I intended, and I saw the bull-necked man tense again, but I was tired of being pushed around, tired of being afraid. Even if this man could probably destroy me with a phone call. Why does it matter? A smile ghosted across his lips. Not a kind smile, but not entirely cruel either. "Because, little waitress, you just spoke to me in a dialect that hasn't been common in Moscow for 30 years. The same dialect my mother speaks, the same dialect used in a very specific neighborhood that no longer exists. My blood ran cold. I tried to pull my hand back, but his grip tightened. Not painful, but inescapable. "I'm nobody," I whispered, and it was the truest thing I'd said all day. Just a waitress. I don't know anything about dialects or neighborhoods. I'm nobody. "No," he said softly, his free hand coming up to tilt my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. His touch was gentle, but I could feel the steel underneath it. The promise of violence held carefully in check. "I don't think that's true. I think you're somebody very interesting." "Victor." The weasel-faced man's voice was urgent. "We need to go. Mikhail just texted. There's been a situation at the port." The dark-haired man, Victor, didn't look away from me. "Handle it." "But..." I said handle it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I have more pressing matters to attend to here." He released my chin but not my hand, and I watched in growing horror as he reached into his jacket. The bull-necked man moved closer, protective, and I realized that whatever Victor was reaching for, his men thought he might need defending. From me, a broke waitress who weighed 115 pounds soaking wet. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a business card, expensive and understated, with just a phone number embossed in silver. "You're going to call me," he said, pressing the card into my palm. "Tonight." I can't, you will." His thumb traced across my knuckles, a gesture that might have been comforting from anyone else, but from him felt like a brand, a mark of ownership. "Because if you don't, I'll come back. And next time, I won't be so patient." It wasn't exactly a threat, but it wasn't not a threat either. "I need to clean up this glass," I said desperately, looking down at the shattered pitcher. Your boss will do nothing." Victor finally released my hand, and I felt the loss of his heat like a physical blow. He pulled out a wallet, leather, probably Italian, and dropped several $100 bills on the table. Far more than their meal would have cost. Far more than was reasonable for the glass, and for your time. Then he did something that surprised me. He said, in perfect Russian, soft enough that only I could hear, "Go home and lock your doors, little dove. The world is more dangerous than you remember." They left in a formation that spoke of military training, or worse, Victor in the center, the other three forming a protective triangle around him. I watched through the window as they climbed into a black SUV with tinted windows. Expensive, armored, probably bulletproof, the kind of vehicle that screamed organized crime or government security. Either way, nothing good. The pretty one opened the door for Victor, and I saw another car pull up behind them, another SUV, more men in suits. An entire convoy, for one man having lunch at a dying diner. Who the hell had I just spoken to? My hands shook as I bent to clean up the glass. Diane's shrieking about the mess barely registering. The business card felt like it was burning a hole through my apron pocket. I should throw it away. I should forget this ever happened. I should go back to being invisible, to keeping my head down and my past buried. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was already too late. Whatever I'd started with that one careless sentence in Russian, there was no taking it back now. I didn't call. Of course I didn't call. What kind of idiot would dial a number given to her by a man who traveled with armed guards and spoke about situations at the port like he was running some kind of empire? A man whose mere presence had made hardened criminals, because that's what they were. I wasn't naive enough to pretend otherwise, tense up and reach for weapons, but I couldn't throw the card away either. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days, that innocent rectangle of heavy cardstock, mocking me every time I walked past it. I'd pick it up, turn it over in my hands, trace the embossed numbers with my fingertip. Then I'd set it down again, telling myself tomorrow I'd throw it out. Tomorrow I'd forget about gray eyes and dangerous smiles and the way he'd called me little dove in my mother's language. Tomorrow never came. Sarah, my 4-year-old daughter with her father's dark hair and my green eyes, didn't notice my distraction. She was too busy telling me about the caterpillar she'd found at preschool, how Miss Jennifer said it would turn into a butterfly someday. Wasn't that magical, Mommy? I smiled and nodded and made dinner from the random items left in our nearly empty refrigerator, trying not to calculate how many days until my next paycheck, trying not to think about the hundreds of dollars still tucked in my apron pocket. Blood money. It had to be. Men like Victor didn't make their fortunes through legitimate business, and yet, it would pay for Sarah's preschool next month, would buy groceries, would give me a small buffer against the constant anxiety that colored every moment of my life. I was still debating whether to use it when someone knocked on my apartment door at 9 o'clock on Friday night. My stomach dropped. No one visited me. I didn't have friends, couldn't afford the luxury of socializing when every free moment was spent working or caring for Sarah or collapsing from exhaustion. My landlord, Mr. Petrov, only came around when rent was late, and I'd managed to scrape together enough to pay him earlier that week. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Mommy?" Sarah looked up from her coloring book, her eyes wide. She was too young to understand danger, but she'd inherited my wariness. My instinct to hide when unexpected things happened. "Stay here, baby," I whispered, moving toward the door. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days, probably in the 1970s. The hallway outside always smelled like cabbage and cigarette smoke, and the locks on the doors were jokes. But it was cheap, and it was ours. And I'd made it as safe as I could. I looked through the peephole and felt the world tilt sideways. The bull-necked man from the diner stood in my hallway, his massive frame barely fitting in the narrow space. He wasn't alone. The pretty one stood beside him, and behind them I could see at least 2 other men in dark suits. My hands started shaking as I stepped back from the door. This was it. I'd offended them somehow. Insulted Victor by not calling. They were here to teach me a lesson about disrespecting powerful men. I'd heard stories, everyone in this neighborhood had, about people who crossed the Russian Bratva and disappeared, about bodies found in the river with their tongues cut out. "Miss Volkov?" The bull-necked man's voice was surprisingly polite through the door. "We need you to come with us. Mr. Konstantin wants to see you." Volkov. They knew my real name. I hadn't used it at the diner. My name tag just said Emma, and I'd been using my ex-boyfriend's last name, Morrison, on all my documents for years. Easier that way. Less connection to a past I wanted to forget. But they'd found me anyway. Of course they had. Men like Victor, like Mr. Konstantin apparently, had resources I couldn't imagine. If they wanted to find someone, they found them. "I'm not going anywhere," I called back, proud that my voice didn't shake. "Much. If Mr. Konstantin wants to talk to me, he can call." A pause. Then, "He sent us to collect you because you didn't call him. This isn't a request. I have a daughter." The words burst out before I could stop them. "She's 4 years old. Please. If I did something wrong, I'm sorry. But please don't do this in front of her." Another pause. Longer this time. I heard muttering, someone speaking urgently into a phone. Then the bull-necked man again. "Bring her." "What?" "Bring the girl. Boss says you can bring her. We have a car seat." They had a car seat. These men, who probably broke kneecaps for a living, had prepared a car seat for my daughter. The absurdity of it would have made me laugh if I wasn't so terrified. "And if I refuse?" "Then we wait here until you change your mind." He sounded almost apologetic. But Boss was very clear. "He wants to see you tonight. The longer we wait, the more impatient he gets. Trust me, you don't want him impatient." I looked back at Sarah, who'd abandoned her coloring to watch me with those 2 old eyes. She'd learned early that life was uncertain, that we had to be ready to move at a moment's notice. It was a lesson no child should have to learn. But what choice did I have? They knew where I lived. They knew my real name. If I refused, would they go away? Or would they simply break down the door? And what would happen to Sarah then? At least if I went with them, I could try to control the situation. Try to explain. Try to convince Victor, Mr. Konstantin, that I was nobody worth his attention. "Give me 5 minutes," I said finally. "I need to get her ready." I dressed Sarah in her warmest clothes, my hands shaking as I pulled her favorite sweater over her head. I packed a small bag with her stuffed rabbit, some snacks, her sippy cup. Things that might comfort her when, things went wrong. I changed out of my ratty sweatpants into jeans and a clean shirt, running a brush through my hair, because some part of me couldn't bear to face Victor looking like the mess I felt inside. The card was still on the counter. I grabbed it, shoving it in my pocket like evidence, proof that he'd asked me to call, that this wasn't entirely my fault. When I opened the door, the bull-necked man stepped back immediately, giving me space. The pretty one smiled at Sarah, who buried her face in my shoulder. "It's okay," I murmured to her in Russian, the language slipping out naturally. "Everything's going to be okay." The pretty one's eyes widened slightly, and I realized he probably understood. Of course he did. Victor's men would speak Russian, would come from the same world Victor did, the same world my parents had come from, before they'd tried to leave it behind, before it had killed them anyway. The SUV waiting at the curb was identical to the one I'd seen Victor leave in. Black, expensive, windows tinted so dark they were nearly opaque. The bull-necked man opened the rear door, and I saw he hadn't been lying about the car seat. A top-of-the-line model was installed in the middle seat, the kind that cost more than my monthly rent. I buckled Sarah in with trembling fingers, her little hand clutching her rabbit. "Mommy, where are we going?" "To see someone," I said, keeping my voice light. "It won't take long." I hoped I wasn't lying. The pretty one climbed in on Sarah's other side while I took the seat next to her. The bull-necked man got in front with the driver, a thin man with a scar running down his cheek who didn't bother introducing himself. A second SUV pulled up behind us as we started moving, and I realized we had an escort. Protection, or insurance that I wouldn't try to run. "What's your name?" I asked the pretty one, surprising myself. But if I was going to die tonight, I at least wanted to know who was taking me to my execution. He looked startled that I'd spoken to him. "Alexei." "I'm Emma. This is Sarah, I know." He said it gently, then seemed to catch himself. "Boss told us. He wanted to make sure we got the right car seat. Asked how old she was, what size." Victor had asked about my daughter, had made sure she'd be safe and comfortable while his men dragged us to... Where? Where were we going? I looked out the window, trying to track our route, but the tinted windows made everything dark and distorted. We were heading away from my neighborhood, toward the nicer part of the city where I only went when I picked up extra catering shifts. The buildings got taller, cleaner, the streets better maintained. Sarah had fallen asleep, her head lolling against the car seat, exhausted from the excitement. I envied her ability to find peace in chaos. "Is he going to hurt me?" I whispered to Alexei, not caring anymore about pride or strength. I just needed to know. "Did I do something wrong?" Alexei shook his head. "Boss doesn't hurt women, not unless they've done something truly unforgivable. And definitely not." He glanced at Sarah. "Not in front of children." It wasn't exactly reassuring, but it was something. We drove for 20 minutes, finally turning into an underground parking garage beneath a building that looked like it housed expensive condos. The kind of place where doormen wore uniforms and residents owned dogs that cost more than cars. The security gate opened automatically, and we spiraled down into the belly of the structure. The SUV stopped in a private parking area, and I saw 2 more vehicles already there, both identical to ours. A man in a suit stood by an elevator, arms crossed, watching our arrival with cold eyes. "I need to carry her," I said, as Alexei moved to unbuckle Sarah. "Please. She'll be frightened if she wakes up with a stranger holding her." He nodded, stepping back. I gathered my daughter into my arms, her warm weight against my chest both a comfort and a terror. If Victor wanted to hurt me, he could use her. The thought made bile rise in my throat. The bull-necked man led us to the elevator, which required a keycard to operate. We rode up in silence, Sarah's soft breathing the only sound. I watched the numbers climb, past the regular floors, past what must have been the penthouse level, all the way to a floor marked only with the letter P private. Of course. The doors opened directly into an apartment, not a hallway, but a living space so large and luxurious it took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, which sparkled like scattered diamonds in the darkness. The furniture was all clean lines and expensive fabrics. Art hung on the walls, real art, not prints. A grand piano sat in one corner, its surface gleaming. And standing by those windows, hands in his pockets, was Victor. He'd changed from the suit he'd worn at the diner, Now he wore dark slacks and a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and decorated with tattoos I couldn't make out from this distance. His hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked tired. Human. He looked terrifying. "Thank you, Dmitri," he said without turning around. "You and Alexei can wait downstairs." The bull-necked man, Dmitri, hesitated. "Boss, are you sure? She hasn't been vetted. Do you think a woman carrying a sleeping child poses a threat to me?" Victor's voice was mild, but I heard the steel underneath. "Go." They went. The elevator doors closed, and I was alone with Victor in his penthouse apartment, holding my daughter, with no idea what he wanted from me or how this night would end. He turned finally, those gray eyes finding mine across the expanse of expensive flooring. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then his gaze dropped to Sarah, and something in his expression softened. "You brought her. Your men said I could." I lifted my chin, trying to find courage I didn't feel. "They said you wanted to see me tonight. So here I am. What do you want?" "The same thing I've wanted since you spoke Russian to me at that pathetic excuse for a diner." He started walking toward me, each step measured and predatory. "Answers. I don't have any answers. I told you. My parents were from Moscow. They died. I learned Russian from them. That's all there is to know." "No." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "That's not all. You spoke in a dialect used by a very specific community, a community involved in a very specific kind of business, the kind of business that doesn't welcome outsiders or accidents." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Your father's name was Dmitri Volkov. Your mother was Katya Volkova, born Katerina Sokolov. They worked for the Sokolov family before they fled to America 24 years ago, with something that didn't belong to them." The room spun. I gripped Sarah tighter, her small body the only solid thing in a world that had just been turned upside down. "How do you—" "Because," Victor said softly, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from Sarah's sleeping face with surprising gentleness. "The Sokolov family is my family. Katerina was my mother's younger sister. Which makes you, little dove, my cousin." The word hung in the air between us like smoke, impossible to grasp but impossible to ignore. Cousin. "That's not possible," I whispered. But even as I said it, memories were flooding back. My mother's face, younger than I was now, laughing as she spun me around in our tiny kitchen, the way she'd always tense when certain songs came on the Russian radio station. How my father would check the locks obsessively, 3 times every night, like he was waiting for something terrible to break through. The car accident that killed them, the way the police had called it a tragedy, a patch of black ice on a clear summer night. How quickly the case had been closed, how thoroughly their lives had been erased, leaving behind only a 7-year-old girl who barely remembered her own language. "Sit down," Victor said, and it wasn't a request. He gestured toward a leather sofa that probably cost more than everything I'd ever owned combined. "Before you fall down." My legs were shaking. He was right. I moved to the sofa on autopilot, adjusting Sarah so she was curled against my chest. She murmured something in her sleep, her small hand fisting in my shirt. Victor disappeared through a doorway and returned with a blanket, cashmere, soft as a cloud, which he draped over Sarah with a care that seemed at odds with everything else about him. Then he sat in the chair across from me, elbows on his knees, those gray eyes never leaving my face. "My mother has spent 24 years believing her sister was dead," he said quietly. "Killed by the same people who murdered most of our family in the power struggle that followed my grandfather's death. She mourned Katya, lit candles for her every year on the anniversary of the massacre, but she wasn't dead. The words felt like they were being dragged from somewhere deep inside me. She was here. With my father. With me. Yes." Victor's jaw tightened. "Because your father, Dmitri Volkov, was supposed to be protecting my family. He was head of security for the Sokolov operation. My grandfather trusted him with everything. And when the Chechen syndicate made their move, when they came for us in the night, Dmitri took Katya and ran. Left my grandfather to die, left my uncle bleeding out in the street, left my mother, who was 8 months pregnant with me, to defend herself. The bitterness in his voice was like acid. I held Sarah tighter, my mind racing. My father, who'd taught me to ride a bike and read me stories before bed, had been a coward, a betrayer. Had left people to die so he could save himself and the woman he loved. Maybe he was trying to save her, I said weakly. Maybe he was a coward who valued his own life over his duty. Victor leaned back, but there was nothing relaxed about his posture. He was coiled tension, violence waiting to be unleashed. Do you know what happened to my family after they fled? My mother gave birth to me in a safe house, alone, except for one loyal soldier. My uncle survived his wounds but lost the use of his legs. My grandmother went mad from grief and threw herself from a window. It took us 10 years to rebuild. 10 years of blood and war and death to reclaim what your father's cowardice cost us. I'm sorry. The words were inadequate, but they were all I had. I didn't know. I was a child. I didn't know any of this. I know. Something in his voice softened fractionally. Which is why you're still alive. Why I sent men to bring you here instead of... He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The implication hung between us, heavy and terrible. What do you want from me? I asked again, forcing myself to meet his eyes. You know who I am now. You know my parents are dead, really dead this time. What's left? Victor stood, moving to the windows that overlooked his glittering kingdom. My mother is dying, he said finally, his voice so low I almost didn't hear it. Lung cancer. The doctors give her 6 months, maybe less. She spent her entire life believing her baby sister was murdered, believing she'd never see Katya again, and now I find that Katya had a daughter. A piece of her that survived. Understanding crashed over me like a wave. You want me to meet her. I want you to give her peace before she dies. He turned to face me, and in the city lights reflecting off the windows, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. I want you to let her see that some part of her sister lived, that Katya found happiness, had a family, even if it was built on betrayal and lies. And if I refuse? His smile was cold. You won't. You can't force me to, can I? He moved toward me again, and I pressed back into the sofa, acutely aware of Sarah sleeping against me. You're barely surviving, Emma. Working at that diner for poverty wages, living in an apartment with locks that wouldn't stop a determined child, raising a daughter alone with no safety net. One bad week, and you're homeless. One illness, and you're drowning in medical debt. You're one disaster away from losing everything. Each word was a knife, cutting away the illusions I'd wrapped around myself. The pretense that I was doing fine, that we were safe, that I could protect Sarah through sheer force of will. I can offer you security, Victor continued, his voice dropping to something almost hypnotic. A real apartment in a safe building, a job that pays actual money, healthcare, protection, everything you need to give your daughter the life she deserves. In exchange for what? Playing dress-up for your dying mother? Pretending to be something I'm not? You're not pretending. He crouched in front of me, bringing himself to eye level, and I could smell that cologne again. Leather and smoke and danger. You are Katya's daughter. You carry her blood. Speak her language. Have her face. My mother showed me pictures once, before she packed them away. You look exactly like Katya did at your age. His hand came up slowly, giving me time to flinch away, but I didn't. I let him cup my cheek, his palm warm against my skin, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone in a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting, but felt like a claim. One dinner, he said softly. Come to Sunday dinner. Meet my mother. Let her see that part of Katya survived. Give her that peace. Is that so much to ask? And if she hates me? If seeing me just reminds her of everything she lost? Then we'll deal with it. His thumb continued its slow stroke across my skin, and I hated how my body responded to that simple touch, how something deep inside me that had been cold for so long began to warm. But I don't think she will. I think she'll love you. How could she not? The question hung in the air, and I didn't know how to answer it. How did you explain to someone like Victor? Someone who commanded respect and fear with equal ease, that people found it very easy not to love me, that I'd spent my entire life being invisible, disposable. The girl no one wanted to keep. Sarah stirred against me, mumbling in her sleep. Her hair had come loose from its ponytail, dark curls spilling across the cashmere blanket. She looked so small, so vulnerable, so dependent on me to make the right choices. And what were my choices, really? Continue scraping by, one crisis away from catastrophe, or accept help from a man who was clearly dangerous, clearly involved in things I didn't want to know about, but who was offering us a lifeline? What about her? I nodded toward Sarah. Your mother. She'll want to know about Sarah's father, about why I'm alone. Victor's expression darkened. Where is the father? Gone. The word came out bitter. He left when I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready for kids, for responsibility. I haven't seen him in 4 years. His name. Why? Because no man abandons his child and gets away with it. The menace in Victor's voice was unmistakable. Not while I'm breathing. It doesn't matter, I said quickly, alarmed by the violence I saw gathering in his eyes. He's nobody. He wanted nothing to do with us, and I wanted nothing from him. It's been just Sarah and me for 4 years, and we're fine. You're not fine. You're drowning. Victor stood abruptly, pacing toward the windows and back like a caged animal. But you don't have to drown anymore. Accept my offer, Emma. Come to dinner Sunday. Meet my mother. Let me help you. And after dinner? What then? Do I go back to my life and pretend this never happened? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. We'll discuss that after you meet my mother. One step at a time. When it was a non-answer, which meant the answer was probably something I wouldn't like. But what choice did I have? He'd already proven he could find me anywhere. Already shown that he had the power to disrupt my life whenever he wanted. At least this way, I had some illusion of control. One dinner, I said finally. I'll come to one dinner, but I have conditions. His eyebrow arched. You're in no position to make demands. Maybe not, but I'm making them anyway. I adjusted Sarah carefully, making sure she was still asleep. You don't tell your mother about my father. Let her believe whatever story she needs to believe about how Katya died. I won't let you destroy her peace just to get revenge on a dead man. Victor considered this, his expression unreadable, agreed. What else? Sarah comes with me, everywhere. I don't leave her with strangers, of course. And after dinner, if your mother doesn't want to see me again, you leave us alone. No more surprise visits, no more men showing up at my apartment. We go back to our lives. No. The word was flat, final. That's not negotiable. Why not? Because your family. He said it like it explained everything, like it justified anything he might choose to do. And I protect what's mine. Whether you like it or not, Emma, you're under my protection now. That doesn't end after one dinner. I'm not yours, I said. But even to my own ears it sounded weak. Aren't you? He moved closer again, and I felt trapped between the sofa and his overwhelming presence. You're wearing my family's blood, speaking my family's language, living in my city under my watch. What part of you isn't mine? The possessiveness in his voice should have terrified me, should have sent me running, but instead, some traitorous part of me felt safe, protected. Like maybe, for the first time since my parents died, someone was offering to catch me if I fell. It was a dangerous feeling, maybe the most dangerous one of all. I need to take her home, I said, looking down at Sarah. She has preschool in the morning. Dimitri will drive you. Victor pulled out his phone, typing something quickly. And tomorrow, someone will come to your apartment to measure for new locks. Real ones. The kind that will actually keep people out. I can't afford. You're not paying. He cut me off with a look. Consider it a gift. From family. That word again. Family. I'd been alone for so long. I'd forgotten what it meant to belong to something larger than myself, but Victor's version of family came with strings attached, strings that looked a lot like chains. The elevator arrived, and Dimitri stepped out, his expression neutral. Ready, boss? Take them home, Victor instructed. Personally. Make sure the building is secure. Post someone outside until the new locks are installed tomorrow. You can't station a guard outside my apartment, I protested. Your neighbors will mind their own business if they know what's good for them. Victor's tone left no room for argument. This isn't a discussion, Emma. You're vulnerable. And I don't allow vulnerability in my family. Not anymore. I wanted to argue. Wanted to insist I could take care of myself. But the truth was, I couldn't. I'd been barely holding on for years. One bad break away from disaster. And now here was someone offering to carry some of that weight, even if his methods were questionable and his motives unclear. Sunday, I said as I stood, gathering Sarah more securely in my arms. What time? I'll send a car at 5. Dinner is at 6. My mother keeps traditional hours. He walked us to the elevator, and just before the doors closed, he caught my wrist gently. Emma, thank you for agreeing to this. It means more than you know. His gratitude was somehow more unsettling than his threats had been. The ride back to my apartment was quiet. Dimitri carried Sarah up the stairs when I started to stumble from exhaustion, his massive arms cradling her like she was made of glass. He waited while I unlocked the door, then did a sweep of the apartment that would have been funny if it wasn't so thorough. All clear, he said finally. Yuri will be outside until morning. If you need anything, he'll help. Why is Victor doing this? I asked suddenly. It can't just be about his mother. There's something else. Dimitri's expression was carefully neutral. Boss's reasons are his own, but I'll tell you this. He doesn't do anything without a plan. And once Victor Constantine decides something belongs to him, nothing in heaven or hell can change his mind. I don't belong to him. Tell him that, not me. Dimitri almost smiled. Good night, Miss Volkov. Lock the door behind me. I did. All 3 locks. For what little good they'd do. Then I carried Sarah to her small bedroom and tucked her into bed, watching her sleep peacefully, unaware that our lives had just changed forever. The business card was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, staring at those embossed numbers in the dim light from the hallway. I'd thought not calling would keep me safe, keep us invisible, but Victor had found me anyway, and now I was caught in something I didn't understand. Pulled into a world I'd spent my whole life trying to escape. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Sleep well, little dove. Sunday will change everything. I should have been afraid. Should have been planning how to run. How to disappear again. Instead, I saved the number and climbed into bed. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night without nightmares. The next 3 days passed in a blur of changes I couldn't quite process. True to Victor's word, men arrived Saturday morning to install new locks, industrial grade, the kind you'd see on a bank vault. They worked efficiently and silently, nodding respectfully when I offered them coffee but never quite meeting my eyes. When they finished, one of them handed me 3 sets of keys and a card with a phone number. Any problems, you call this number, he said in accented English. Someone will come immediately. I didn't ask who would come or what constituted a problem in Victor's world. The guard outside my door changed shifts every 8 hours like clockwork. Yuri in the evenings, someone named Pavel overnight, and a younger man called Anton during the day. My neighbors stopped making eye contact with me in the hallway. Mrs. Chen, who usually watched Sarah on my late shifts, suddenly remembered she was too busy to babysit. Word had spread fast. Emma Morrison, the invisible waitress nobody noticed, was connected to someone dangerous, someone powerful, someone people crossed the street to avoid. I should have hated it, should have resented the way Victor had inserted himself into my life without permission, marking me as his territory for all the world to see. But when I walked to the corner store Saturday night and the group of men who usually catcalled every woman who passed fell silent and looked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. It terrified me how quickly I could get used to it. Sunday arrived too fast. I spent the morning trying to find something appropriate to wear, finally settling on the only dress I owned, a simple navy blue sheath I'd bought at a thrift store for job interviews. It was plain, modest, probably years out of style, but it was clean, and it fit. Sarah had a pink dress her preschool teacher had given her, slightly too big, but pretty enough that she twirled in front of the mirror, delighted with herself. "Where are we going, Mommy?" she asked for the 100th time as I brushed her hair into 2 neat braids. "To meet some people," I said, keeping my voice light even though anxiety was eating me alive. "A nice lady who's sick, and her son who wants to help us." "Why does he want to help us?" "Because we're family. Because my father betrayed his family, and he's decided I need to pay that debt somehow. Because he's dangerous and controlling, and I don't know how to say no to him. Because he's kind," I said instead, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. The black SUV arrived at exactly 5 o'clock. Not Dmitri this time, but Alexei, who smiled at Sarah and complimented her dress in Russian. She giggled, hiding behind my legs, and something in my chest tightened at how easily she responded to kindness. How starved we both were for someone to be gentle with us. The drive took us out of the city proper, into neighborhoods where houses had gates and lawns, and probably cost more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes. We turned onto a tree-lined street where the homes sat far back from the road, hidden behind stone walls and elaborate landscaping. The SUV stopped in front of wrought iron gates that opened automatically. Beyond them, a circular driveway led to a house that looked like something from a European postcard. Stone and timber, with tall windows and a slate roof. Elegant without being ostentatious, beautiful in a way that spoke of old money and careful taste. "This is where Victor lives?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "One of his properties," Alexei said casually, as if everyone had multiple houses. "His mother lives here. He has an apartment downtown where he conducts business, but he comes here most evenings. Family is important to Boss. Family." That word kept coming up, wrapping around me like a rope I couldn't untangle. Victor was waiting at the front door, and my breath caught despite myself. He wore dark slacks and a gray sweater that matched his eyes, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him. More human. His hair was still slightly damp, like he'd just showered, and the late afternoon sun caught the silver at his temples. He was beautiful. Dangerously, devastatingly beautiful. And the way he looked at me as I climbed out of the SUV, like I was something precious that had been lost and found again, made my pulse race in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "Emma." My name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. Then he crouched down to Sarah's level, his expression softening in a way I wouldn't have thought possible. "And you must be Sarah. Your mother tells me you're 4 years old." Sarah nodded shyly, one hand fisted in my dress. "I'm Victor. My mother is very excited to meet you both. She made piroshki. Do you know what those are?" Sarah shook her head. "They're like little pockets of deliciousness, filled with meat and cheese and all kinds of good things. I think you'll love them." He stood, offering his hand to her. "Want to come inside and try some?" She looked up at me for permission. I nodded, my throat tight, and watched as my daughter placed her tiny hand in Victor's much larger one. He led us into the house with surprising gentleness, pointing out a painting of horses that made Sarah gasp with delight. The interior was as beautiful as the exterior. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. But what struck me most was how lived in it felt. Family photos on the mantel, books stacked on side tables, a pair of reading glasses abandoned on the sofa arm. This was a home, not a showpiece. "She's in the sunroom," Victor said quietly, his hand settling on the small of my back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "She's been preparing all day. I haven't seen her this animated in months." What if she doesn't like me? The fear slipped out before I could stop it. Victor paused, turning to face me fully. His free hand came up to cup my face, tilting it so I had to meet his eyes. "She will love you. Trust me." "I don't trust you." "Smart." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone in that gesture that was becoming familiar. "But you're here anyway. That's enough for now." He led us through the house to a sun-drenched room filled with plants and comfortable furniture. And there, in a wingback chair by the window with a blanket across her lap, sat a woman who looked like an older, frailer version of the mother I barely remembered. She had the same bone structure my mother had. High cheekbones, elegant nose, wide eyes that might once have been bright but were now faded with age and illness. Her hair was white, pulled back in a neat bun, and her hands, thin and marked with age spots, trembled slightly as they rested on the blanket. But when she saw me, those faded eyes went wide. One hand flew to her mouth, and she made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Boże mój, she whispered. My God. Katya, my Katya. Mama, no. Victor moved to her side quickly, kneeling beside her chair. This is Emma, Katya's daughter. Remember, I told you. But she wasn't listening. She was staring at me like I was a ghost, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, her hands reaching out. Katya, you came back. I knew you would. I knew they were lying when they said you were dead. I knew. Mrs. Constantine, I started. But Victor shook his head slightly. Mama. His voice was gentle but firm. This is Emma, your niece, Katya's daughter. Look, she brought her own daughter to meet you. Your great niece. Something in his words seemed to penetrate. The old woman blinked, focusing on Sarah, who was half hidden behind my legs. A new wave of tears spilled down her cheeks, but she smiled. A beautiful, heartbreaking smile. A baby, she whispered. Katya had a baby. Yes. Victor helped his mother to her feet, supporting her weight as she shuffled toward us. Emma, this is my mother, Irina Konstantinova. Mama, this is Emma Volkov and her daughter Sarah. Irina reached out with shaking hands, cupping my face the way Victor had done, her touch feather-light. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine for something I didn't understand. Then she switched to Russian, her voice thick with emotion. You have her eyes. Katya's eyes. The same green as summer grass. Her thumb brushed away a tear I hadn't realized I'd shed. I thought I would die without seeing any part of her again. But here you are. Here you are. I'm sorry, I whispered in Russian, the language flowing more naturally than it had in years. I'm sorry for everything, for what my father did, for the years you lost. I'm so sorry. Shh. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and old books, her frail body trembling against mine. The sins of the father are not the sins of the daughter. You are blameless, child. You are here. And that is miracle enough. We stood like that for a long moment. This dying woman and I, connected by blood and tragedy and the ghosts of people we'd both loved and lost. When she finally pulled back, she turned her attention to Sarah, who was watching with wide, uncertain eyes. And who is this beautiful girl? Irina asked in careful English, her accent thick but understandable. I'm Sarah, my daughter said softly. Sarah. Irina repeated it like she was tasting the name. A strong name. A good name. Would you like to help an old woman into the dining room? I made special cookies for dinner. Sarah looked at me again, and I nodded. She took Irina's outstretched hand with the fearlessness of children, and together they walked slowly toward another room. Irina pointing out various photos and trinkets along the way. Victor and I followed at a distance, and I felt his hand settle on my back again, warm through the thin fabric of my dress. She thinks I'm my mother, I said quietly. She knows you're not, but you look so much like Katya, that for a moment, her heart forgot. The cancer has spread to her brain. She has moments of confusion. His voice was rough with emotion he was trying to hide. Seeing you brought her more joy than I've seen in months. Thank you for that. I didn't do anything. You came. You let her see that part of Katya survived. You gave her hope. His fingers spread against my spine, and I felt the heat of his palm through my dress. That's everything. Dinner was surreal. The table was set with fine china and crystal, the kind of things I'd only seen in magazines. Irina had clearly spent hours preparing. Platters of piroshki, bowls of borscht, a roasted chicken with vegetables, fresh bread, and an array of desserts that made Sarah's eyes go wide with wonder. We ate and talked, Irina asking me gentle questions about my life, my work, Sarah's preschool. Victor watched us with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but instead felt protective, possessive, like he was memorizing every moment, storing it away for later. Sarah charmed everyone, her innocent chatter about caterpillars and butterflies making even Victor smile, a real smile, not the dangerous ones I'd seen before. Irina fed her cookies and called her Lapochka, little paw, a Russian term of endearment, and I watched my daughter bloom under the attention, This was what I'd wanted to give her. Family, warmth, a sense of belonging. I'd just never imagined it would come wrapped in violence and secrets, and a man whose gray eyes followed my every movement like I might disappear if he looked away. After dinner, Irina grew tired. Victor helped her back to the sunroom while Sarah and I cleared plates despite his protests. When he returned, he found us in the kitchen, Sarah helping me rinse dishes while chattering about the cookies. "Leave them," he said. "The housekeeper will handle it tomorrow. I can clean up after myself." "I know you can, but you don't have to. Not here." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching us with that same intense focus. "My mother wants to see you again, next Sunday if you're willing. Victor. She's dying, Emma. Every day she wakes up is a gift. And you make her happy. You make her remember what she's fighting to live for." His voice dropped. "Please, come back next week. And the week after that. However many weeks she has left. How could I say no to that? How could I deny a dying woman the comfort of family? Even false comfort built on secrets and lies." "Okay," I whispered. "We'll come back." "Thank you." He pushed off the counter, moving closer. Too close. I could smell his cologne again, feel the heat radiating from his body. "You're a good person, Emma Volkov. Better than you know. I'm just trying to survive. No." His hand came up, fingers tangling gently in my hair. "You're trying to live. There's a difference, and I'm going to make sure you can." The weeks that followed developed a rhythm I hadn't expected, one that felt dangerously close to normal. Every Sunday, Victor's car would arrive at 5 o'clock. Every Sunday, we'd drive to that beautiful house where Irina waited with food and stories and a love that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Sarah adored her, climbing into her lap to listen to fairy tales told in broken English mixed with Russian. And Irina, she glowed in my daughter's presence, the pain lines around her eyes softening whenever Sarah laughed. But it wasn't just Sundays anymore. Victor started appearing at the diner on my lunch breaks, sitting at table 7 with whatever men he'd brought that day, ordering food he barely touched while his eyes tracked my every movement. At first, I'd tried to ignore him, to pretend his presence didn't make my skin prickle with awareness. But ignoring Victor Constantine was like ignoring a storm, impossible and foolish. "Your boyfriend tips really well," Diane said one afternoon, counting the $100 bills Victor had left. Again. "You should keep him around." "He's not my boyfriend." "Sure, honey." "And I'm the Queen of England," she smirked. "The way that man looks at you, like you're the only person in the room, that's not casual." She was right, and that terrified me. Because the way Victor looked at me had changed over those weeks. The calculating coldness had given way to something warmer, more dangerous. Something that made my breath catch when his fingers brushed mine as he handed me his coffee cup. Something that made my heart race when he smiled, really smiled, at something Sarah said. I was falling. I knew it. And I didn't know how to stop. It was the 6th Sunday dinner when everything shifted. Irina had been particularly tired that day, the cancer stealing more of her strength with each passing week. She'd fallen asleep in her chair after dinner, Sarah curled against her side, both of them peaceful in the fading light. Victor and I stood by the window, watching them, and the silence between us felt heavy with unspoken things. "She's getting worse," I said quietly. "Yes." His voice was rough. "The doctors say maybe another month, maybe less. I'm sorry." "Don't be. You've given her more happiness in these past weeks than I could have hoped for. You and Sarah. You've been a gift." He turned to face me fully, and something in his expression made my pulse quicken. "Emma, I need to tell you something." "What?" "When this started, when I found you at that diner, I had plans. Calculated plans. I was going to use you to give my mother peace. Yes, but also..." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I was going to make you pay for your father's betrayal. Not physically, not with violence, but I was going to bind you to this family in ways that would ensure you could never leave, never be free of the debt your father owed." My stomach dropped. What kind of ways? It doesn't matter now, because somewhere between that first dinner and now, the plans changed. You changed them. His hand came up, cupping my face in that gesture I'd come to know too well. I don't want to trap you anymore, Emma. I want to keep you. There's a difference. Victor, let me finish. His thumb traced my cheekbone, his touch achingly gentle. I know what I am. I know the world I live in isn't safe or clean or good. I've done things that would horrify you. I will continue to do things that would horrify you. Because that's the life I chose, the empire I built from my family's ashes. But with you, with Sarah, I want to be something better, someone worthy of the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. How do I look at you? The question came out barely above a whisper. Like maybe I'm not a monster, like maybe there's something in me worth saving. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching mine. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you to accept everything I do. But I'm asking you to stay, to let me protect you, provide for you, give you and Sarah the life you deserve. To be family, in truth this time, not just in blood. And if I say no, then his voice was steady, but I saw the lie in his eyes. Victor Constantine didn't let go of things he wanted, but he was trying to give me a choice, even if it killed him. I'll make sure you're taken care of. A better apartment, a trust fund for Sarah's education, protection from a distance. But I'll let you walk away if that's what you need. I should have said yes, should have taken that escape route he was offering, however reluctant. Should have protected Sarah and myself from this world of violence and secrets. But standing there, watching my daughter sleep peacefully against a dying woman who loved her, feeling the warmth of Victor's touch and seeing the vulnerability in eyes that usually showed only strength, I realized I didn't want to walk away. Maybe that made me weak, maybe that made me foolish, but for the first time since my parents died, I felt like I belonged somewhere. To someone. Like I was more than just a ghost moving through the world, invisible and alone. I want things too, I said finally. If I stay, if we do this, I need promises. Name them. Sarah comes first, always. Before your business, before your mother, before me. Her safety, her happiness, that's non-negotiable. Agreed. What else? You don't lie to me. I know I can't know everything about your business, and I'm not asking for that. But about us, about your intentions, about anything that affects Sarah. You don't lie. I won't. His hand slid from my face to my neck, his thumb pressing against my racing pulse. I promise you that. And you teach me. The words came out in a rush. About this world, about how to protect myself and Sarah if something happens to you. I won't be helpless. I won't be the weak link that gets exploited. Something flashed in his eyes, approval, maybe, or desire. I'll teach you everything. How to shoot, how to fight, how to think like someone who survived in this world. You'll never be helpless again. Okay. I took a shaky breath. Then yes, we'll stay. The kiss that followed was inevitable. His lips claimed mine with a hunger that had been building for weeks, his hand tightening on my neck as he pulled me closer. I gasped against his mouth, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until I was dizzy with it. Until all I could feel was Victor. His hands, his heat, the barely leashed violence in the way he held me like I might shatter or flee. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. Mine, he whispered in Russian. You're mine now, Emma. Say it. Yours, I breathed back, and felt the last of my resistance crumble. We're yours. Irina died 3 weeks later, in her sleep, with all of us around her. She'd been lucid that final day, smiling at Sarah's stories, squeezing my hand and calling me her beautiful niece, thanking Victor for bringing her family back before the end. The funeral was smaller than I'd expected. Just family, Victor had said. Though I learned that family, in his world, meant something different than I'd understood. Men in expensive suits who showed Victor the kind of deference usually reserved for kings. Women who eyed me with curiosity and calculation. Children who played quietly, already learning the rules of this dangerous world. I stood beside Victor through all of it, Sarah holding my hand, and felt the weight of what I'd chosen settle over me like a cloak. This was my life now, my family. For better or worse, 2 months after Irina's death, Victor asked me to marry him. We were in his penthouse, our penthouse now, since he'd moved us there the week after I'd agreed to stay. Sarah was asleep in her new room, a space 3 times the size of our old apartment, filled with toys and books, and everything a little girl could want. "It's practical," Victor had said, kneeling in front of me with a ring that probably cost more than a house, for protection, for legitimacy. "My enemies won't touch you if you're my wife. Sarah will have my name, my protection, everything I can give her." "Romantic," I'd said dryly, even as my heart hammered in my chest. "I'm not a romantic man, Emma. But I'm yours. Completely, irrevocably yours. If you want romance, I'll learn. If you want poetry, I'll write it. If you want the fucking moon, I'll figure out how to steal it for you." He'd slipped the ring on my finger, a perfect fit. Because of course he'd found out my size somehow. "Just say yes." I'd said yes. The wedding was quick, quiet. Just us and a few witnesses at City Hall. Victor in a dark suit, me in a cream dress he'd had made for me. Sarah in white with flowers in her hair, ecstatic at being a flower girl. Dmitri and Alexei stood as witnesses, both looking vaguely emotional in a way that would have been funny if the moment wasn't so surreal. When Victor kissed me after we'd signed the papers, it felt like sealing a deal with the devil. But the devil looked at me like I was his salvation, and maybe that was enough. A year later, I stood in the nursery of our home, the house where Irina had lived, which Victor had insisted we move into because Mama would have wanted you here, watching our son sleep in his crib. Nikolai Dmitrievich Konstantin, named for Victor's grandfather and my father, a bridge between our broken families. He had my green eyes and Victor's dark hair, and when he smiled, my heart ached with how much I loved him. Victor came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "He's perfect," he murmured. "He is." I leaned back into his warmth, into the safety of his embrace. "Sarah keeps asking when he'll be old enough to play with her. Soon." He pressed a kiss to my neck. "She's been so good with him. Such a good big sister." Sarah had bloomed in the year since we'd joined Victor's world. She went to the best preschool now, had friends, had a father figure who doted on her and taught her Russian and let her paint his nails pink when she asked. She called him Papa Victor, and the first time she'd done it, I'd seen tears in his eyes before he'd hidden them. "I need to go to Moscow next week," Victor said quietly. "Business with the Chechen syndicate. There are still old debts to settle. The ones who killed your grandfather?" "Yes." His arms tightened around me. "It's time to end it. Finally put those ghosts to rest. Be careful." I turned in his arms, looking up into those gray eyes that had once terrified me and now felt like home. "Come back to us. Always." He kissed me, deep and claiming. "You're my reason for everything now, Emma. You and Sarah and Nikolai. I'll always come back." And he did. He always did. Through the dangerous years that followed, through the wars with rival families and the constant threat of violence that shadowed our lives, Victor always came home, bloodied sometimes, exhausted often, but alive and whole, and mine. The life I'd chosen wasn't easy, wasn't safe, wasn't anything like the normal existence I'd once dreamed of for Sarah and myself. But it was ours. I'd gone from being invisible, a ghost of a girl serving coffee and counting pennies, to being the wife of one of the most dangerous men in the city, from having nothing to having everything. From being alone to being surrounded by a family that was violent and complicated and fierce in their loyalty. Sometimes, late at night when Victor was away on business and the house was quiet, I'd remember that afternoon at the diner. Remember the moment I'd spoken Russian without thinking. Remember how one careless sentence had changed the entire trajectory of my life. I should have regretted it. Should have wished I'd kept my mouth shut, stayed invisible, stayed safe in my poverty and obscurity. But watching Sarah grow confident and strong, watching Nikolai discover his world with fearless joy, feeling Victor's arms around me in the darkness, I couldn't regret it, not even for a second. "What are you thinking about?" Victor asked, finding me in the nursery one such night, drawn by whatever invisible thread connected us. "How one moment can change everything," I said softly. "How speaking Russian to a stranger in a diner led to all of this." He pulled me against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. Not a stranger, he corrected. Family. You just didn't know it yet. And now? Now you're home. He kissed the top of my head, and I felt the truth of it settle into my bones. You've always been coming home to me, little dove. It just took us both a while to realize it. Outside the nursery window, the city glittered with lights and life and danger. Victor's world. Dark and beautiful and unforgiving. Our world now. And standing there in his arms, our children sleeping peacefully nearby, I knew with absolute certainty that I wouldn't change a single thing. Not the fear, not the danger, not even the long, lonely road that had led me to that diner on that ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Because sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the right one. Sometimes the monster teaches you how to be strong. And sometimes family finds you in the most unexpected places, in a pair of gray eyes watching you across a dying diner, in Russian words spoken without thinking, in the steady heartbeat of a man who promised to protect you and actually meant it. I was Emma Konstantina now. Wife, mother, part of something larger and more complicated than I'd ever imagined, and I was finally, truly home.